This webinar will be available at a later date for viewing on our YouTube channel. This series began in 2015 to share information of aquatic organism passage, dam removal, fisheries improvement, community and stakeholder engagement, and other related topics. Since our inception, we've provided 3 quarterly webinars. Today's presentation will be one of 4 that we provide this year in 2024. You can find our prior webinars on our website that's located here on the right side of the channel. We have 11 previous webinars that are currently available on that YouTube channel. You can search for Joint Committee on Fisheries Engineering and Science to pull those up or to pull that channel up. And just a quick note, our leadership on the Joint Committee of Fisheries Engineering and Science, Kevin Mulligan, Amy Hunt, and Jane Castillo, you see email if you can reach out to those folks. This is a really good committee. It's something I've really enjoyed being involved with, but we're actively seeking out new members. And so please reach out to one of these 3, or you can reach out to me as well if you're interested in joining the committee. And getting on some of our task teams. Just a quick reminder that the new BES education and training for project managers and designers for fish passage and dam removal projects are also available through our website. The training portal is the first stop shop to find training in areas of practice. There's also project development and execution checklists that are there. So I encourage you to go to that website and check that out. In addition to today's webinar, we have 3 webinars planned for the remainder of 2024. We have, in addition to today's webinar, we have planned for fall of 24 webinar focusing on the takedown or tear down of the Forkland River dams, and then we're going to be December of 24. We're planning to have Crystal Woodley present on fish passage exclusion for non-native species of concern. Our webinar task committee members are on the right of the panel here, and I'm proud to announce that one of those task members, Kathy Holden, will be one of our presenters today. So looking forward to getting into the slides. Today's webinar is Understanding Mitigation Banking for Dam Removal and Culvert Replacement. It will feature 2 presenters, Kathy Hoberman and Lisa Hollings with Segedy, in that order. Kathy is a registered professional engineer in multiple states and a senior project manager of Resource Environmental Solutions. She has 23 years of experience in engineering and ecological expertise and serves on several committees, including the Virginia Stream Barrier Removal Task Force and the Chesapeake Bay Program Stream Restoration Verification Team. Lisa has been a dam removal project manager at American River since 2008 and has managed more than 100 dam removal design and construction projects in the eastern U.S., which is a broad suite of responsibilities that include identifying priority watersheds for dam removal investment, cultivating projects, engaging dam owners and the community to build support, procuring and contracting for professional services, fundraising, and engaging regulatory and resource agencies. Feel free to engage in today's webinar by loading questions into the chat box, and we'll address those presenters after they complete the wrap up. I think Kathy's going to have a poll at the front end of her presentation, so also feel free to engage at that time. So Kathy's going to be our first speaker. Kathy, feel free to share your screen and get started.
Okay. I know some folks, it sounded like they were having trouble hearing Toby, so hopefully this is good and everybody can hear me okay. All right. Well, thanks for attending today. I know myself and Lisa, we're both very excited to talk about this. This is the second time that Lisa and I have teamed up to talk about how we can use the mitigation arena to help remove dams, because really that's what both of us are super excited about. Neither of us are necessarily mitigation experts, but we do live in that dam removal world, and we want to use mitigation as a tool to get dams out. So just in general, the goal here is to provide everyone kind of that understanding of how we can use this tool of mitigation, compensatory mitigation, to help us remove dams, and then what that might look like in your state. So to kind of do that, I feel like we need to start at the beginning a little bit to understand what compensatory mitigation. The poll that Toby mentioned, if you all can just type into the chat a 1 if you have worked with or understand what compensatory mitigation is and how kind of crediting works under that scenario, or a 2 if the world of compensatory mitigation is just is brand new, or maybe you've heard of it but still you haven't worked in it and don't have a whole lot of context for it. So Toby's going to keep an eye on the 1s and the 2s for me. And then so going down through the outline, you know, once we kind of get that background down, how dam removals are appropriate for stream restoration, for stream mitigation crediting, kind of those methods and means to develop credits. We won't go super deep into any of it, but just give you all a taste for some of the states and methods that have been utilized successfully. Recommendations for starting that conversation if you haven't done a dam removal in your state for mitigation before. And so those are all my topics. And then Lisa, we're going to hear her great experience to get a deep dive on dam removal mitigation examples, lessons learned. And then also, I think this is really important for people to hear as well, just, you know, an environmental nonprofit perspective on mitigation. Mitigation sometimes gets a bad rap from that community. So at least one perspective on how that can work. All right, Toby, what's the outcome on our 1s and 2s?
Looks like the majority are number 1s. There are a few 2s scattered in. I saw 1.5. So we've got a
Okay.
range.
All right. So so that means most people have some experience with it. So I will try to go a little faster on some of this, and I won't go too deep into it. So compensatory mitigation, just real basic. It's required when a project under Section 404 or similar has they're unable to avoid or minimize the impacts to streams and wetlands on their project site. And so because they have these deficits of an environmental condition, they have to compensate through that, and that's done through the mitigation program. So there's 3 types in the mitigation world. There's a mitigation bank. So companies will proactively restore something. It creates what's called a mitigation bank. And then you can go and buy a credit from that mitigation bank to provide for your compensatory mitigation for your project. You can pay into a program, and not all states have the pay-in program. That's called in lieu fee programs. Or the permittee can create their own mitigation on site or nearby or something like that, where they're actively doing some act of restoration or preservation in order to create the credits. So stream and wetland restoration, enhancement, and preservation are kind of standard forms for that 404 mitigation, the compensatory mitigation actions, if you're looking to actively create that crediting. Dam removal is kind of seen, or has historically been seen, as an alternative form for the 404, directly able to create the stream mitigation credits. All right, so just a little bit of vocabulary to make sure everybody's on the same page. Your IRT is basically your group of regulators, federal and state regulators, who are going to work with and develop your mitigation crediting, review your project, and all that sort of stuff. Your service area is basically where your impact happens, but then also where your mitigation happens. There's different definitions for different states on what that looks like. So your debit, so that's your loss. That's the amount of restoration or improvement that you need to have on your crediting process. And so the credit is then just the gain, or that unit of improvement of aquatic function at your mitigation site. So we're going to talk a lot about credits today. So creating that credit and what it means, you can sell it, you can buy it, you calculate it. So it's very important to understand that the credit is your gain that you're seeing at your mitigation site. So the reason why having a known and established crediting process is important is an example like this here in North Carolina. where there was a process that was developed back in 2004, and some dam removals happened from it. But there was some discontent with what that process looked like. And so the Army Corps had rescinded the guidance that was developed. And a lot of states were using the North Carolina as a basis for their development of a program. It was a reference idea. A lot of people thought it was actually still pretty good. But it wasn't. It was a long time. There was a lot of back and forth. No dam removals were happening in North Carolina during this time, and a lot of other districts were also kind of in that cold feet era of not wanting to get into this because look at the mess it caused in North Carolina. So it really wasn't until 2018 when Regional Guidance Letter 1801 was issued, also Nationwide Permit 53, but less so on that one. But really, that Regal 18 was a defining document to help Army Corps districts across the country understand, communicate to their own staff, but also communicate to mitigation bankers and those who are creating the credits on how to develop that program, and some of the things they need to consider. So this document is hugely important to developing a mitigation credit process specifically for dam removals. So I want to go through some of the things that I think are pretty key in this document, but I definitely encourage everyone to download a copy of it and read it. So the title of it is Determination of Compensatory Mitigation Credits for Removal of Obsolete Dams and Other Structures from Rivers and Streams. So the first two things I want to point out is that obsolete doesn't mean these are derelict dams or the ownership is unknown or anything like that. It just means that the owner no longer wants it. It could still have recreational value. It could still be doing something. It still could be providing hydropower, providing some benefit, but the owner of the dam no longer wants it. Therefore, it's considered obsolete. So just kind of think real big picture. Any dam really is applicable for this. And the other structures part, that means we can talk about culverts. So perched or undersized culverts that are creating an impoundment or a backwater condition can also be considered for mitigation credits. I'm going to say dams and dam removal a lot, but really everything also applies to the culvert removal scenario. So just keep that in mind as well. All right, so some of the 4 big takeaways on guiding the understanding about dams and how the Corps should regulate and view the removal of dams is that first, to understand that dams and other obstructions adversely affect stream functions, right? So when you remove that obstruction, you're automatically uplifting your stream condition, you're meeting goals for the Clean Water Act, and you're putting dam removal a bit on a pedestal to say this is a way to restore those stream functions. Also, the most adverse effects for removing the dam are short-term. So there are a few things. The 2 biggest things that often are brought up is sediment deposition downstream and loss of wetlands. Well, very specifically, it says loss of impoundment induced wetlands due to dam removal should not require compensatory mitigation. So that's laid out in the document. So your mitigation doesn't require mitigation. That's a bonus. And that, for as far as the sediments go, that's going to be a case-by-case basis. But if you do have downstream deposition, it should not be automatically considered a negative aspect. Or if it is, it's likely short-term. There's a lot of studies out that show that the sediment flushing actually occurs quite frequently, and you're actually improving conditions most of the time. And of course, this assumes your sediments are not contaminated or laden with toxicity that needs to be addressed. But just your existing materials are held up in your impoundment. Those should be able to be released without a negative impact. And then last, we shouldn't expect a restored reservoir or impoundment to be created back to its pre-disturbance state. Many things are different. Land uses are different. Our rainfall distribution is different. There's a lot of different things that mean we're not going to get back to that kind of well before these dams were established state in many cases. The document also gives a lot of really great guidance on how to develop a crediting system if you don't have one already, and some good things to consider and think about in developing that mitigation credit value. So again, it should really be based on long-term net gains, and not anything that is short-term. So there's not a debit taken out of your credit calculation just because there's a short-term adverse effect. If you already have a quantitative functional assessment methodology in your state, that you should try to use that. So don't necessarily reinvent anything or create something new if what you have can be used, modified, and applied to dam removals. A lot of times when we're talking about stream restoration, we're looking at it in purely a linear feet perspective. So your up and downstream direction. But if you are working on a very wide river system and maybe your dam is 500 feet wide, and your impoundment length maybe is 2,500 feet, that 500 feet wide might really have a huge impact on what your uplift is. So make sure you think about what your width is, and maybe consider using a different metric than linear feet as you're scoring for credits, if that's what you're scoring on. And then the riverbed, both upstream and downstream of the impoundment, should be considered for credit production. And so a lot of this comes from the idea that a lot of streams are sediment starved downstream of a dam because all that material is held back. And so letting that material go kind of reinvigorates the bed and the stream bed conditions. All right, so again, looking at Regal 18, it underpins the importance of rivers, right? And rivers do a lot of different things. They have there's water quality involved, there's flow regime, sediment, biological improvements, you know, that, and those are, none of those are necessarily the geomorphic condition. But it also, like, it all relates. There's so much going on when you take out a dam to reintroduce it as a riverine system. So you want to make sure you are thinking about the big picture, everything that you're going to get from your uplift from this impoundment becoming a river again, a stream system. So lots of times the very first order of determination is what your length is. I know I did mention think about width as well, but most of the time folks are just looking at length. So let's talk about length. So what is, or even just broader speaking, your area of impact. So the length of your stream channel, the length of your crediting is it's gonna vary. It's gonna vary based on whether you have a run of the river dam, such as the picture on the left, or maybe more of a reservoir impoundment based kind of pond feature, which is very common. Drinking water reservoirs, farm ponds, those the likes of that sort of stuff. So on, you know, maybe your more linear system run of the river dam, you just have your stream length, and what that stream length is, what your backwater is. You could use that from effective length using FEMA, using Bankful. Maybe you're going to use it based on the live bed or what becomes your flowing river at a certain flow condition. There's lots of different ways to interpret and develop it when you have a run of the river dam. Also, when you have more of an impoundment based pond dam condition, you might have a main channel, but because these are so broad, you often have auxiliary or tributaries that are coming into it. And those should also be part of your consideration of stream length in what you're getting in your uplift, in your benefit, your gain from a river system. And, you know, maybe you have to use your impoundment definition based on your state definitions of things. So there's a variety of things to consider based on your type of system and then your crediting protocol within your state or how you want to develop it. So one of the common crediting methodologies right now is the stream quantification tool. And I mean this for streams, right? Not necessarily for dam removal, but for streams, the SQT is fairly prevalent right now. There are a few guidance documents that have been developed specifically for dam removal and how you apply the SQT to your dam removal system. So I'm thinking specifically of the St. Paul and the Nashville districts, and they both do call out the application of that guidance document to culvert backwater conditions. So some things to think about when if you're doing an SQT methodology in your state, that there's regionalization within the SQT. So what a Minnesota dam removal looks like in the scoring might not be what another state's scoring looks like that uses SQT, because they're going to have parameters that are important to their state. So you have to think about that. And the thing, because SQT is so specific in what it's looking at and measuring, it might be that the uplift you could see from a dam removal project might not be very well documented in the crediting process through SQT. And so there's challenges of classifying function with that direct parameter measurement. And that's because you're going from a lentic to a lotic system. It's a completely different system. So you might not be able to see and measure some of these things. And that's why these guidance documents are there. They're to help get you through that. But then there's also just some ways that you might not see as the value of your dam removal through this system. So just, that's a word of caution. The one thing I do really like about it, that there's generally 3 reaches for the crediting. So it's at your impact site, so your dam or your culvert, the impoundment itself, and then very specifically the downstream reach of these things. So I do love that the SQT keeps that into mind. And then of course, there's also room for impacts even further upstream, which is a discussion you should have with your IRT on how you look at that. Another crediting method is through the unified stream methodology. This is not as prevalent. I use it here in Virginia, which is where I'm sitting today. I think it's quite good. We went through a long process. There's some peers, some others in the state that really kind of kicked this off and did a great job developing some protocols for establishing this. So under the unified stream methodology, credits are really based on your restored stream length. And I mean, restoration is a specific term. So you're meeting the restoration criteria for the state. And then you get to do some additional credits through what is called adjustment factors. Just for clarification, there is buffer crediting that also gets added into this, but we're gonna not talk about that. We're just gonna talk about the river today. So what these adjustment factors are is they really are helpful in boosting your credits in a dam removal scenario. So you think about all the things that you're improving, and there's some guidance on what adjustment factors are. And so all these examples, this table, these are all things that have been considered as adjustment parameters, adjustment factors within Virginia from the various projects that have been proposed to the IRT. So it's basically your determined stream length. So whatever that ended up being, whether it's with tributaries or your effective impoundment, whatever it is, your project has determined your stream length. And then you establish a value, a coefficient of 0.1 through 0.3 to all these things that you feel are additional benefits in a dam removal situation. You then multiply that adjustment factor by your base stream length to create your credits. So your effective impoundment, that's important to understand. So the things we've done in Virginia is that effective impoundment length using FEMA have been used on run of the river dams, and valley length on more of a reservoir-based dam removal situation, because they have been smaller streams and the course of the stream in its final standing is a little less unknown. We can always go back and adjust that later, but we have so much in adjustment factors that these have really worked out quite well. So not to get stuck on just those 2 things, but just to be aware there are a lot of other districts or states that have their own crediting system. Pennsylvania has a very state-specific crediting system based on uplift. But it is definitely of a restored channel. So whereas in Virginia, we don't necessarily have to create that restored channel, which is why we're using valley length. So we're not necessarily designing a channel, we're letting the channel evolve. In Pennsylvania, for the mitigation, it's more of a defined river channel where you have to carve it out, especially in an impoundment-based situation. In Maryland, there's been one project, and I realize this is very East Coast heavy. That is that is the land that I primarily live and function in, but there are definitely other things that this apply to moving west as well. Maryland is developing a fish passage tool that will help with crediting. Right now, they've kind of stalled out. There was one project that went through. There was some discontent with how many credits it created because they were given for upstream access. And that was felt that was too much. However, in New England, you get extra credits for opening up additional channels and passage. So each state, each district is a little bit different. There's been a couple different modifications off the Charleston district process to generate credits for dam removal. And then of course, North Carolina also ended up coming up with with a new quantitative functional assessment to get to it. So there's a lot of different methods and processes out there. It's a matter of starting the conversation. And so if you haven't done this in your state before and you want to get one done, your starting point is really with your IRT. Have that conversation about what you want to do and your starting point ideas of crediting. Now, they especially if they've never done a dam removal, they could be very concerned about this being within your state allowance, especially if natural channel design is codified in how a restoration has to occur or how you evaluate your restoration. So, really getting into this is an approved alternative, reference Regal 18, start talking about it, use examples from other states, just bring in, this is not new, right? So bring in examples from other states, but start with that conversation. Several states also have existing state dam removal task forces or aquatic connectivity teams. Those are great resources to maybe tap into to help develop the crediting, right? It's a big process to develop the crediting. It's not necessarily a one-person job. So you want to think about the unique cases for your site, your situation, but also the broad view of what's important in your state. Service areas, we've seen some service area extensions associated with dam removal, and so that gets into some of that opening up other challenges. In Virginia, we drain to the Chesapeake Bay, so for a while there was a conversation about anadromous fish from the bay, because there's drift within fish runs. Maybe the whole service area should be everything in the Chesapeake Bay. And so this caused a lot of discussion and some concerns. Eventually that was dismissed as an idea that the state did not want to pursue. So just a little bit of a caution on how you use open river miles and service areas to talk about where your creditings can be applied and calculated. And then of course, just cautionary tale to be aware that sediment will always be a question no matter what on every single project. And a couple resources, I talked a lot about Regal 18, but also there's a TNC document that could be pretty valuable for helping develop this. I think I went a little long, but I think we're still good. So I'm going to end here and hand it to Lisa for her deep dive. Okay, Lisa, sorry, I'll unmute you if see if It's a little tricky because usually I moderate, so I have a lot of the controls that and maybe I didn't get all of them to Toby. Toby, you might be able to unmute her as well. You should.
There we go. Got it.
Okay.
Okay, super. Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here, and thank you, Kathy, for organizing this. Let me go ahead and share my screen so that we can do this. There we go. All right. Well, thank you so much again for joining us. And Kathy explained a lot of really great things, and while she was talking, I was adding a couple things to my slides. So, yeah, my experience with mitigation has been all through experience. And I'll be going through some of those projects and sort of looking at things. For those of you that don't know American Rivers, we're a national nonprofit. You can see our mission statement over on the left and the number of dam removals by state. We do have the dam removal interactive map on our website, and you can check that out if you're interested. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some metrics now. I've been involved in 7 dam removals for mitigation. 5 of those have been in the Ohio Basin and 2 have been in the Delaware. And that matters because of the way we have river basins designed in Pennsylvania. 6 projects were for transportation mitigation, including PennDOT and the Turnpike. 1 was a permitting managed mitigation for a commercial real estate development. Fish and Boat Commission, which has been a steadfast partner of American Rivers, was involved in all but 2 of those projects. Only 2 of those projects met American Rivers restoration standards on the first try. And that is one of the things that I want to get across as part of our lessons learned. 3 projects did not provide significant ecological lift. We'll talk about that in a minute as well. So the restoration standards, this is something that American Rivers devised a number of years ago, just to give us some internal guidance for, should American Rivers be involved in the project? How, what is it we're trying to accomplish? So we set standards for the standards as well as for good practice. And if anybody, you'll be getting these slide presentations, but I also have a little handout that I can provide if you're interested. So let's go to my first project. This was done in 2009. All of the advanced work was done before I came to American Rivers, and it just was a project that I took over. So you can see a picture here. There actually was somebody living in this house that was originally the part of the waterworks itself. So it was kind of crazy the first time I saw it. So the before and after picture, and just a little quickly about the lessons learned is that, right away it became obvious that dam removal was a worthy instrument for transportation. And this was a site that was actually a water storage impoundment. And there were several stream channels that were within that impoundment that were able to be counted for mitigation credit, as Kathy mentioned in one of her points. But the thing that I learned is if you're dealing with a storage impoundment, you better dewater that thing for at least a year before you start dam removal. We actually had a pump and we're trying to draw it down the week before construction started, which was really, really foolish. We wound up not being able to create some of the stream channel that we needed, but we did substitute wetland. We accidentally created 4 acres of wetlands because we were not able to address the stream channel improvements that were needed. We had riparian tree plantings that just were just amazing in their success. However, the Corps of Engineers looked at some of the stream bank conditions at the 5-year mark and wanted us to tear out those 20-foot, 5-foot tall sycamore trees and regrade the stream banks. So, and that was because we had not been able to let that wetland, let that, excuse me, impounded area dry out before we were able to go forward. So important lessons for delivering that success and the metrics that are required. The next project was the Trafford Dam removal. So this was an industrial water supply. It was located adjacent or on a brown field, and it was selected because the area that they were mitigating was just right in that particular area. Because it was a because this was a brown field, there were severe limits in what we could disturb. And so we could not touch the stream banks because there was industrial materials that had been deposited. So we didn't get the ecological lift from stream bank restoration. We needed to do some grade control structures, and we couldn't move the stream banks to embed the limbs of those structures, and so the structures failed. We finished this project, and then Hurricane Irene and Lee came through within 2 weeks, and we lost all of our structures. This high wall that you see in the right picture, at the bottom of it, there's a big pipe that comes out, and that is a major CSO outfall. So we removed a dam at a CSO outfall, which meant that we would have gotten some water quality uplift as a result of the dam coming out, but then we had the CSO outfall right there. And the thing that really was difficult was that in Pennsylvania, we have Act 2 for brownfields. The soil requirements for brownfields versus the sediment requirements for dam removal really kind of fought each other. And we actually wound up having to do 2 different sets of sampling, 2 different sets of chemical analysis on the same materials, because under the brownfields law, once you take sediment out of a stream, it becomes soil, and then it has to be tested again. So that made this a really complicated project with a lot of cost that should not. It would have been easier to do it had we not had to deal with this. Another site. This is also a PennDOT, Pennsylvania Department of Transportation mitigation. Obsolete water supply. It was a storage dam. So the local government decided that they would accept the mitigation funds and they would oversee the project. And one of the things that I think we all learned is that you need an experienced project manager if you're going to do a mitigation project and deliver on those metrics that you promised. And this is a case where we had to go back to PennDOT, get more money, and undertake a second phase of restoration because a lot of things were just ignored the first time around. So yeah, doing it over is more than twice as costly as doing it right the first time. The good news is this project was eventually successful, and it delivered all the metrics for the credits. This is the Delp Dam removal. It was an abandoned dairy farm dam, and it was chosen due to proximity to the turnpike and also because there were adjacent wetlands. Unfortunately, there was a lot of reliance on engineered structures, and we wound up creating grade control structures that were actually larger than the dam we removed. And this is one that was a turnpike commission. It could have been a really great project, but the context was basically not considered. We had a great opportunity to restore some floodplain, but there was a plan to put in a sewer system lift station adjacent to it, so we lost that opportunity. It was a clear case of it was chosen for convenience, close to the site where the mitigation need was being generated, but it really did not deliver ecological lift. And this is a case where it really shines a light on the importance of our restoration standards in terms of making sure that you're getting what you pay for. This dam, the last one that I'm going to be looking at is, it was an obsolete industrial water supply. This was the permitting managed mitigation. The site was selected specifically for its ecological lift. And then the design and the permit had already gone forward with American Rivers funding. And then we used construction money from the mitigation bank that the permittee had to have. And so what we learned from this one is that if we have the advanced planning and we've identified a good opportunity for mitigation credit, we can actually get better ecological lift by taking it on in that order. The river context, the dam was located right below the confluence of the main stem, Connoquenessing Creek, and a tributary, Thorn Run, and it provided more than enough mitigation credit to satisfy what the permitting needed. The dam removal was exceptionally cost effective for the developer because they didn't have to pay for the design and the permitting that was already done. We also used this project to demonstrate to a foundation funder that investing in mitigation projects and getting them ready to go was really effective. We also learned the hard way that keeping the MOUs in a straightforward manner really helped. There were a lot of cooks in the kitchen and something was left undone, and it delayed us at the beginning of the process. So that was a little frustrating. So overall, the lesson that I'd like to deliver, the takeaway for today is that in Pennsylvania, dam removal has been advantageous as a mitigation strategy. And I think it could be applied way more broadly. But one of the reasons that American Rivers was willing to accept mitigation money was that Pennsylvania DEP does a very good job of making certain that avoidance and minimization have been addressed, and that we're just mitigating the things that just are totally unavoidable. When we choose the projects for ecological lift rather than convenience, we get better outcome. I've been advocating for establishing some criteria for dam removal projects for mitigation, and then using our GIS to prioritize those. When we have competent management, project management that will make sure that we deliver on the success, the knowledgeable people to make sure that the project is done correctly. When our restoration standards are fully embraced by all parties, and then when we can consider adaptive management in the project, because inevitably, when you do a dam removal design, there's no way to account for every possible condition that you might encounter when you're in the field doing that construction. So some resources, Kathy mentioned aquatic connectivity teams, and on the left of this slide, you'll see a list. American Rivers is engaged in these at this point. Now in Pennsylvania, that's the one that I've been the most involved with. We haven't really talked about compensatory mitigation and dam removal as part of that solution, but I think that's a piece of work that would be important for the aquatic connectivity team to take on. And then in addition, the National Fish Habitat Partnership, these are the 20 organizations that sort of bridge the gap between the American Fisheries and Wildlife Agencies, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, local partners. I am the coordinator for the Ohio River Basin Fish Habitat Partnership, and there's a significant amount of funding that is available for projects. And, you know, a database for mitigation projects, I think is something that is fundable at the FHP level. So that's worth considering. And I think that's something American Rivers would be really interested in investigating a little bit farther. So you can see the list of this is the landing page for the partnerships, and then you can go through that and find the contacts for each of those. So at this point, I will stop and I'll stop sharing, and we can certainly have time for questions. Note my email address below if there's anything in my slides that you'd like to see or to talk more about. I'd love to have a conversation. Thanks a lot.
Lisa, Kathy, that's great presentations. We really appreciate your expertise. I think it looks like with some of the chat here that my audio is bad, so I'm not going to turn my camera on to keep the kind of constraints on our bandwidth down here a bit. I don't see any questions right now, but I'm hoping we'll get a couple here in the next minute or two. The question I would have for Lisa and or Kathy, my sense, I'm in Washington State, in the Western United States. My sense is that dam removal is, kind of the topic, the impetus for those are kind of increasing, becoming more common. Just curious, in the areas you work, if you could talk a little bit about, is it kind of constant? Is it increasing? Is it increasing exponentially? Just kind of curious your insights on that front.
So if I understood you correctly, Toby, you're asking about costs for dam removal. And I would say yes, those costs have been increasing for a number of reasons. The first thing is that fuel escalated incredibly during COVID, and those prices are still high. The other issue is, of course, a lot of projects that we do require what do you call it? The Fair Labor Standards Act, the prevailing wages, and those have increased significantly. Now that's good news for the people that do the work, and we certainly want to support them, but it has to be accounted for, especially other factors that involve the cost of labor. Finally, another issue is dealing with the actual context of the site and the amount of sediment management. And as Kathy mentioned, sediment management is always going to be a discussion that you have with regulators, and it can be a significant driver of the cost of a project.
Thank you very much. Kathy, can you run with these questions? I think my audio is still giving people fits, it sounds like.
Yeah, sorry you're having troubles today, Toby. Okay, so I'm going to read a couple of these questions on behalf of Toby here. First set that's come in: what type of perpetual protection is placed on the sites? Conservation easement as a question. And this is all from one person, 3 questions. Is the public trust doctrine taken into consideration when developing credits and placing durable protection on the site? And then third, what type of projects permittee would purchase credits at these mitigation banks? So I think I'm going to take this one because it's a lot about the banking system. So yeah, usually there's a permanent perpetual easement that's placed on mitigation sites. So it's generally going to be for that effective length, or whatever your crediting length is usually what the conservation easement or whatever state easement gets you to that same status. And that's a perpetual easement. I'm not super familiar with what you mean by the public trust doctrine, but I mean it's a very regulated process, and so there's, like I mentioned, the avoidance and minimization ideas, and then of course you're working through state agencies whose entire goal is to protect public interest, public resources, and the environment. So hopefully that kind of addresses what you're asking in there. And then anybody who has an impact on their project. So if you're building a subdivision, if you're building a road, or replacing a highway and maybe you have to widen it or something like that, those are all impacts that could potentially require compensatory mitigation. So any kind of development or redevelopment could need that. So again, that's something you figure out during your impacts, your development process. Okay,
So I'd like to take the next one.
yeah.
This is from Kristen McKay. One of the issues in Canada is that the owner is expected to be the one to remove the dams that are not compliant with the Fisheries Act. So their removal is available for compensatory mitigation. And how do you deal with that? In American River's experience, we work with dam owners for removal, whether it's for mitigation or for another reason, but even projects that are removed for mitigation, we have a memorandum of agreement that basically specifies that American Rivers will be the project manager, that we will deliver the standards that are set in the mitigation agreement. But that overall, the ownership of the property is retained, notwithstanding the conservation easement or deed restriction or what other mechanism ensures that that property stays in its mitigated form. So yeah, there are those legal instruments that you can work with a nonprofit or another party to undertake the requirement of removing the dam. And that, but the owner doesn't physically have to go out and rent the bulldozer and the backhoe and do the work themselves.
Great. So the next one is, have HEA or REA been used for crediting in this context? And so I'm guessing you're talking about habitat equivalency analysis, and resource equivalency analysis. I don't think so. Like I said, I'm not a mitigation expert by any means. So perhaps if somebody else can type in a response that maybe is familiar with this in the questions, that would be great to help us understand that. All right, and then somebody noted that a link to the North Carolina quantification method is handy, or would be handy. I guess you're asking for it. I will see if we can pull that up and get that added. Another question, is there a standard budget period of time, et cetera, for post-project monitoring? I will say yes. Lisa, do you want to talk about this one, or do you want me to talk about this one?
Actually, and yes, there is a standard monitoring time frame. Generally, when American Rivers does these things, we write our MOU so that we are not tied into providing long-term monitoring for this. This becomes the responsibility of the agency that gets the mitigation credit, if it's PennDOT or if it's the Turnpike Commission. In the case of our permittee, for the commercial development, that was passed on to them. So they have that responsibility to work with a consultant and do that long-term monitoring. So that's where the benefit of working with another party to get that done, is you can divide up those responsibilities. For American Rivers, we would not have the funding in place to do that 10-year monitoring as it's required. So it works out well for us to just divide that up and pass it on to the responsible party.
Yeah, and so my company, Res, we do mitigation banks, we develop them, and that's part of what we're building into our costs to then turn around and sell a credit. Is that 10 years, 5 years, 10, 8 years, 20 years of monitoring that's required. That's generally established through your state, and that those are all wrapped in. So you basically don't. Crediting can get complex, right? Say you analyze how many credits can come from your site, but that doesn't mean the day you finish construction, all of those credits are not necessarily available to then turn around and sell. And this also depends on, like, if it's a bank or it's a permittee responsible mitigation, but basically you're monitoring your site over time to ensure that the standards that you establish with your IRT to meet are met before those credits are then officially approved, either for selling or for applying to your PRM site or anything like that. So that if if in the end your site fails, all your vegetation, you know, fails for one reason or another, or something happens and you have just horrible site conditions, it's eroding like crazy, it never stabilizes, anything like that. That's all part of that mechanism for monitoring and reporting. So then there's adaptive management requirements and things of that nature. So you never can just walk away from a site and say, all right, I hope it works, right? There's that constant requirement to make sure it is a successful site in order to be used as mitigation credit. Okay, there was a question about getting on this more formally. That's fine. I think you can join. I think there's a specific email. Toby, can you grab the address of the Fisheries Engineering and Science group so that if folks want to get on our permanent webinar announcement list, they can sign up?
Yep, I'll do that.
Thank you.
Okay, can I jump in and answer Leslie's question? So,
Yes.
Dewatering, she's asking about dewatering in advance if you're dealing with a dam that provides storage. In other words, a large area that's inundated. Generally, when somebody comes to me and says, I have this dam, it needs to come out, my first question is the valve operable? And if so, let's let the water down as quickly as we can and keep it dewatered until we're ready to go to construction. Yeah, between Howell and another project, I learned the hard way that the best thing you can possibly do is leave that impoundment dry as long as possible before you get the equipment onto the site. It's a better outcome every time.
Okay. And we did jump over one to ask a little bit about how the cost for a credit. So I assume you're talking about if a banker, a mitigation company is developing a bank, how do they determine the price for the credit? So that's kind of like the secret sauce. So I can't tell you all of that. But really it's a matter of your internal resources, identifying what your equipment costs, what your labor costs, what your cost to buy the easement, any of the land or legal aspects, like it has to be all rolled in. You have to estimate, project out your costs for your 10 years of monitoring, what all that looks like. So it's a pretty big rubric to determine it. And then your number of credits. So your total price by number of credits. I will say from our perspective, it generally, it works out pretty well as far as a good cost per credit ratio, cost, and then your sale point, right? And then if your sale point, your price of selling is really market dependent. So your cost for building and your cost for selling, those are two different things. So obviously if your cost for building the site is more than your cost that you can sell it for, then you wouldn't do it. So in situations where you have to physically remove all the sediment or have really high off-site disposal costs, like sometimes you can waste sediment on site, sometimes you have to take it to a landfill, sometimes just the sheer quantity, whether you're on-site disposal or off-site disposal, makes it so expensive that you can't get a good ratio on your cost to build it versus your cost to sell it. So we have found lots of times in the scenarios where you don't have to really handle that sediment very much. Those are the situations where you get a much better cost to build, and therefore your selling value, the delta on that makes more sense. Okay. Christina's saying, I guess the question on the site in Canada. So since neither Lisa or I are Canadian and deal with the Canadian market, I'm guessing, so the comment is, the issue is that the dam removal does not generate credits if the dam is owned. Only orphaned sites qualify. So how can you reconcile polluter pay with getting credits? So since I don't I mean, I know I don't know the Canadian system on how this might work, but the only thing I can think of is that maybe if the owner can find a way to donate the site to a nonprofit and have some kind of cost share program or something like that. I don't know. That might be a regulatory element, a law element within Canada that has to be resolved before you can really benefit from mitigation as a tool for dam removal. We are at or over time. I think I guess there's one more question if you folks want to hang on for answer this one more question. Can you talk more about how a mitigation credit can be banked? How commonly do public agencies sponsor the bank, then can sell to private entities? What is the long-term monitoring requirement for banks? All right, so I'm gonna skip on the long term because I think we kind of talked about that as far as the success criteria. That's all set up within your program. I don't think it's really common for public agencies to sponsor banks and then sell to private entities. I think what's more common is that public entities will do it for themselves. So if a like a DOT, they'll create the program of mitigation projects that will then offset their own transportation programs. Or a county government might do something similar where they're going to build a new landfill or a wastewater treatment facility or something like that. So they might create a program where they develop mitigation projects and use for themselves. So I have seen that in many locations, but I don't know that it's very common to sell to private entities. I could be wrong there, but I don't know of it.
Yeah, in Pennsylvania, I don't think that that's allowed. Now I do know that there are companies like RES that Kathy works for that creates a mitigation bank. Now, another thing too is PennDOT or Turnpike Commission could go to a private mitigation bank and buy credits if they chose. That is an option, but it doesn't work the other way around where, let's say a land developer needs to offset, because they're going to put so many feet of stream in a culvert so that they can build a parking lot. They either have to buy credits from an existing bank or they have to become a permittee managed bank on their own.
Yep. Okay, I'm going to cut us off. We're over time. Toby, do you want to close anything out?
No, other than just to say thank you very much, Kathy and Lisa. That was really an excellent presentation, or group of presentations. Thanks, everybody.